Inside the private family rooms at Windsor, Catherine gathered Prince Louis and Princess Charlotte close and delivered the words no child was prepared to hear. It was not a public speech. It was not a palace statement. It was a mother's.
Rain had been falling over Renmore Castle since dawn, a soft gray drizzle that clung to the ancient stone walls and blurred the world beyond the tall windows of the East Wing. Inside, the corridors were unusually quiet. Staff moved with a hushed urgency, exchanging glances, but few words, as though the entire castle had been holding its breath since the previous evening. Prince Edmund, 8 years old and full of the restless energy that had always defined him, sat on the window seat of the nursery, watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass. Beside him, his younger sister, Princess Avellini, just 6, was quieter than usual. She had brought her favorite stuffed fox with her that morning, something she hadn't done in over a year, and she held it now with both arms, pressed tightly against her chest. Neither child fully understood what was happening, but children rarely need full understanding to sense that something has shifted. They had noticed the way their nanny's voice had wavered when she said good morning. They had noticed their father, King Cashin, standing alone in the hallway outside their mother's private study for nearly 20 minutes the night before, his hand resting on the door but never opening it. They had noticed, most of all, the absence of their mother's laughter, which usually drifted through the castle like something you could set your day by. Queen Isolde had always been the heart of Renmore's public life, warm, unguarded in a way royals rarely were, known for kneeling down to speak with children at hospital visits, for laughing too loudly at her own jokes during state dinners, for the handwritten notes she left for palace staff on their birthdays. She was, by every account, beloved, which was precisely what made the coming hours so difficult for everyone who worked within those castle walls. That morning, before the children had even woken, King Cashin had met with the Queen's medical team and the keeper of the household in the small drawing room usually reserved for private family matters. The conversation had been brief, clinical, and devastating in its plainness. The Queen's recent health concerns, which the family had kept carefully private for weeks, would need to be addressed publicly. There was no way around it any longer. The public announcement would happen that afternoon. "They're too young," the king had said quietly, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "They're too young to carry this." But there was no version of the coming days that would allow the children to remain untouched by it. Renmore was a small kingdom, but its royal family lived under a particular kind of scrutiny. Beloved, watched, photographed, discussed. Avellini and Edmund would hear whispers in the halls of their tutoring rooms. They would see it on the faces of the household staff. Better, the king and queen agreed, that they hear it first from the two people who loved them most. By 11 that morning, Queen Isolde had dressed simply, foregoing the formal attire she typically wore for official matters. She wanted, on this day above all others, to look like their mother and not like a monarch. She sat at her vanity for a long moment, staring at her own reflection, gathering something that felt less like courage and more like resolve. She found the children in the nursery playroom, where Edmund was half-heartedly stacking wooden blocks and Avellini sat curled in the window seat, still holding her stuffed fox. When the Queen entered, both children looked up immediately. Something in their mother's expression told them, before she had said a single word, that this was not an ordinary visit. "Come sit with me," Isolde said, settling onto the small carpet in the center of the room, the way she used to when they were toddlers and the world was simpler. Edmund abandoned his blocks at once. Avellini slid down from the window seat, fox still in hand, and pressed herself into her mother's side the moment she was close enough. For a moment, no one spoke. Isolde reached out and smoothed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, buying herself the last few seconds of ordinary quiet before everything changed. "I need to tell you both something," she began, her voice steady in a way that took every ounce of composure she had. "Something important, and something that might be a little frightening to hear. But I want you to hear it from me, not from anyone else." Edmund's brow furrowed. He was old enough to recognize the particular gravity in his mother's tone, the same tone adults used when delivering news that could not be taken back. "You know I've been going to see the doctors a lot lately," Isolde continued. "More than usual. It's because they found something. An illness. It's serious, and it means I'm going to need to have some treatments over the next, while that might make me feel quite tired, and might change how I look for a bit. Avellini's small fingers tightened around the stuffed fox. Are you going to be okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the question Isolde had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. She had promised herself she would not make promises she couldn't guarantee, not even to comfort her children in this moment. Honesty, delivered gently, was the only gift she had left to offer them. The doctors are going to do everything they can, she said carefully, and I am going to fight this with everything I have, because I have two extraordinary reasons to fight. She pulled both children closer. But I won't pretend to you that it's simple, or that I know exactly how it will go. I don't. Nobody does yet. What I do know is that I love you both more than anything in this world, and that is never, ever going to change. For a moment, Edmund said nothing at all. He was staring down at the carpet, his jaw tight in the particular way it tightened when he was trying very hard not to cry, a habit he'd inherited from his father without either of them realizing it. Then, all at once, the effort collapsed. His shoulders folded inward, and a sob broke loose that he had clearly been holding back since the moment his mother walked into the room. I don't want you to be sick, he said, the words coming out broken and small, nothing like the composed, carefully mannered boy who had been taught since birth to keep his emotions in check during public appearances. Here, in the privacy of the nursery, there was no need for composure. I don't want anything to happen to you. Isolde pulled him into her arms, holding him as his small frame shook. Nothing is going to happen to me today, or tomorrow, or for a very long time, if I have anything to say about it, she murmured into his hair, though even she could hear the fragility beneath her own reassurance. Beside them, Avellini had gone very still, the way children sometimes do when a feeling is too large to process in the usual ways. Then, quietly, she began to cry too. Not the loud, dramatic tears of a child throwing a tantrum, but something quieter and somehow more devastating. Tears that simply slipped down her cheeks as she buried her face into her mother's shoulder, the stuffed fox crushed between them. I don't want you to have the treatments, Avellini whispered. I don't want you to feel tired. I want you to feel like you. I know, my love, Isolde said, her own composure finally beginning to crack. Tears gathering that she had promised herself she would not let fall in front of the children, a promise she now found impossible to keep. I want that too. But sometimes, to get back to feeling like myself, I have to go through something difficult first. That's what the treatments are for. They're not punishment. They're the path back to being okay. King Cassian appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, having given his wife the space to deliver the news in her own way. Though he had been unable to stay away for long, the sight of his children in tears, wrapped around their mother on the nursery floor, undid something in him that decades of royal training and composure could not withstand. He crossed the room quickly and lowered himself down beside them, wrapping his arms around all three at once, until the four of them formed a single knot of grief and love on the carpet where, only an hour earlier, wooden blocks had been stacked in careless towers. We're going to get through this together, Cassian said, his voice thick. Every single one of us. That is what family means. It means nobody carries this alone. The public announcement was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon, to be released as a formal statement from the office of the royal household, accompanied by a brief recorded message from the Queen herself. Palace communications staff had drafted and redrafted the statement more than a dozen times, trying to strike an impossible balance. Honest enough to satisfy a public that had grown to feel a genuine, personal affection for their queen, but measured enough to protect the family's dignity and the children's privacy during an intensely painful time. By 1:30, the family had gathered in the small private sitting room adjacent to the king's study, the same room where the day's events had first been set into motion hours earlier. Edmund and Avellini, their eyes still red, sat on either side of their mother on the settee, neither willing to be more than an arm's length from her. You don't have to watch if you don't want to, Isolde told them gently, gesturing to the small television where the statement would be broadcast live. It might be strange, hearing it said so formally, after we've already talked about it ourselves. Edmund, surprising everyone, shook his head. I want to watch it with you, he said. I don't want you to be alone when it happens." Avellini nodded in silent agreement, still clutching her fox, now damp with tears. At precisely 2 o'clock, the keeper of the household appeared on screen from the castle's formal briefing room, his expression composed but grave. He read the statement slowly, deliberately, each sentence landing in the quiet sitting room like a stone dropped into still water. Her Majesty Queen Isolde has been undergoing medical evaluation in recent weeks following a period of declining health. Following consultation with her medical team, Her Majesty will be commencing a course of treatment and will be stepping back from public engagements during this time to focus on her recovery. The King and the royal household ask for privacy for the Queen and the family during this difficult period, and thank the people of Renmore for their continued support and understanding. Then came the recorded message, Isolde's own voice, gentler than the formal statement that preceded it, speaking directly to the people who had, for over a decade, treated her not merely as their monarch, but as something closer to family. She spoke of gratitude, of hope, of her determination to return to the work and the people she loved. She did not mention, in that recording, the two small figures who had cried in her arms just hours before. That part of the day belonged only to them. When the broadcast ended, the room fell into a heavy silence. Avellini was the first to break it, curling further into her mother's side. "Everyone's going to know now," she said quietly. "Yes," Isolde admitted, "but that also means everyone will be sending love your way too. You might find that helps, more than you expect." Outside the castle gates, within the hour, small clusters of well-wishers had already begun to gather, leaving flowers and handwritten cards along the iron railings, a quiet, spontaneous outpouring that would grow steadily over the following days. News of the Queen's illness spread quickly, dominating headlines and conversations across Renmore and beyond, though the palace held firm in its request for privacy regarding the children, refusing all requests for photographs or comments involving Edmund and Avellini in the days that followed. That evening, long after the official statements had been issued and the castle had settled into an unfamiliar hush, King Cassian found his children in the nursery once more, this time preparing, with visible reluctance, for bed. Avellini had insisted on keeping her stuffed fox beside her pillow, rather than on the shelf, where it usually lived. Edmund lay staring up at the ceiling, clearly far from sleep despite the exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Will she be here in the morning?" Avellini asked, her small voice cutting through the dim room. It wasn't a question about geography. It was a question about permanence, about the kind of fear that settles into children when the adults in their lives are suddenly revealed to be less invincible than they'd always assumed. "Yes," Cassian said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "She'll be here in the morning, and the morning after that, and many, many mornings after that. This is going to be hard, Avellini. I won't lie to you about that. But hard is not the same as hopeless. Do you understand the difference?" Avellini considered this with a particular seriousness only a 6-year-old processing something enormous can summon. "Hard means it hurts," she said slowly. "But hopeless means there's no chance at all. And there's still a chance." "There's still a chance," Cassian confirmed, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "A very good chance, in fact. Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known, long before any of this began. That hasn't changed." Across the room, Edmund had gone quiet, listening. After a moment, he spoke, his voice smaller than his father had heard it in years. "I want to be strong too. For her." Cassian moved to his son's bedside, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be strong every moment, Edmund. Not for her. Not for anyone. Not even for yourself. Some days, you're allowed to just be a boy who is scared for his mother. That's not weakness. That's love. And love is never something you need to hide in this family." The king stayed with them longer than usual that night, long after both children had finally, exhaustedly, drifted into sleep. Avellini with her fox tucked beneath her chin, Edmund with one hand still curled around the edge of his blanket, as though bracing for something. Cassian sat in the near darkness of the nursery for a long while afterward, listening to the quiet rhythm of his children's breathing, before rising to return to his wife, who was waiting for him in the room where, just that morning, an ordinary rainy day had become the beginning of something entirely different. Not an ending, not yet, but the start of a long and uncertain road that the family of Renmore would now have no choice but to walk together, one difficult, hopeful day at a time.